Before I begin, I need to share one more aspect of my biography with you. I am a Russian citizen of Ukrainian descent who now lives in a post-communist country and studies in American university. Isn't it slightly ironic? All these factors had a huge impact on me, and they helped me to realize one important thing. We human beings are fascinating animals. We have an intrinsic desire to connect with each other. We are social animals. Every evolutionary biologist will tell you that. However, and because of this need to connect with each other, we dedicate ourselves towards a creation of a global community of individuals. However, when we phrase our aim in these efforts as one world, we show another side of us. The use of the word one neatly reflects one of the major barriers towards the global integration of communities and individuals. The barrier I'm talking about is egocentrism. However, in order to avoid it right now, let me define what do I mean by this term. It is not simply upholding your own self-interest above everybody else's, nor is it simple overestimation of your self-worth, although both these factors combine with many others to form what I will be talking about. The egocentrism I will be talking about is the unwillingness to fully comprehend and take into account the perspective of another person. As some of you may know, this definition is a slight modification of the one which is used in the developmental psychology and which states that egocentrism is child's inability to understand the perspective of another person. So, this definition was used by Piaget in his classical studies with children and the mountain and is now thoroughly investigated in the research under the umbrella of theory of the mind. And this very research says that child at around the ages of 4 and 6 starts to become able to control egocentrism. So, the question is, how can something which we can control can pose a threat to our globalization? The answer is twofold. Firstly, on the personal level, yes, at the aforementioned age between 4 and 6, we become able to control egocentrism. But do we do it? Unfortunately, not as often as one would hope. Adult egocentrism is a well-known phenomenon, and although with the coming of 21st century, the number of time we spend in various verbal and non-verbal interactions with each other increases exponentially, it appears we do not learn. Majority of discussions, especially those where the stakes are pretty high, end up in separation into groups, confrontation, and can even lead to aggression, be it a verbal one, non-verbal one, direct one, or indirect one. And the reason for these misunderstandings is not that we cannot understand each other, it's just that we do not do it. So you see why I substituted the word unable to unwilling. Now, let's come to the second part, and this is where it all becomes interesting. Let's look at slightly wider scales and use a bigger units for our examination. Let's talk about communities. The brightest example of egocentrism running rampant between two communities are football fans. As you might well know, they like to fight with each other. To be clear, these are people who share a major part of their belief system, meaning that they disagree over a certain point which to an outsider would seem relatively minor. Nevertheless, the unwillingness to try to understand why the perspective of another group differs from your own, and through unwillingness to provide the other group the equal chance of being right or their argument being equally valid, this can lead into what you see on the picture. Now, let's go a little bit further. Now we speak about something which in Europe which is called immigration crisis. In this case, the diversity between groups is even higher, which means there are even more points for disagreement. Each of these points can become the reason for aggression. And in the best case scenario, it can end up with simple verbal abuse. It's the best case scenario. In the worst case scenario, it can end up in violent outbursts, pogroms, and something even worse, like putting this fence where we don't want the people to come, the people who we do not understand and to whom we do not give enough credit. Lastly, think about Northern Ireland, the conflict between Protestants and Catholics. If this is not the issue where people cannot really just try to understand each other, I don't know what it is. And since I started talking about the religious disputes, let's look at even wider scale. But before we do that, think about the last argument you had with somebody. Try to recall the attention you gave to what the other person was saying. Or even more, answer the following question for yourself. Did you genuinely understood what the other person wanted from you? What were his or her motives? Why you had a disagreement? Now, substitute yourself with the government of one country and the opposing side with the government of another. Although we claim to live in a civilized society where conflicts are supposed to be settled via diplomacy rather than via brute force, it is the inability to reach compromise in the first parts which leads to escalation in aggression. As von Clausewitz put it, war is nothing more but an extension of politics by different means. And there is an interesting point in the research going on, is that majority of the world's conflicts and wars were nothing more but the collisions of ideology. And the extension of these conflicts, the amount of aggression there was directly proportional to the other side being not understanding of the other side. Think about the Crusades. This is the point where people didn't really try to communicate. They were completely ignorant of the belief system, of the argument which the other side was making, and we all know where it got us. Although you can always make a valid argument that ideology is nothing more than a tool for manipulation, think about this from a different angle. In order for manipulation through ideology to be successful, those who are manipulated by ideology need to believe in what the ideology is saying. And the cornerstone of this belief is ignorance about the ideology of opposing side. This point is brilliantly demonstrated in the George Orwell's novel 1984, and we can think about our own history, mainly the Cold War. This is the total clash of ideologies, people on one side and people on the other side. They don't even allow the slightest possibility that the opposing side may be right, even though the positions on each side didn't cancel each other out. They were not incomparable. They could have lived together. It's possible to combine them. And this is what it almost brought us. Now, there is another thing. We can again think about the crisis of ideology, the collisions of cultures, is today's terrorism, issue with terrorism. It is the clash of ideology. It is when people do not want to understand each other. They do not give enough credit. Now, let's look at the last point, at even wider picture. Let's put our planet on one side and us, whole humanity, on the other side. And to be fair, this is the best case scenario if you want to be egocentric. Because if we assume that we have an argument with the planet can't really say anything. We can completely ignore it, and that's what we have been doing. And this is why we have parasitizing upon our resources with the attitude, grab as much as you can and as fast as you can. Although there are people who try to take the nature's perspective and they try to argue on her behalf, those are the scientists who are raising the alarm bell and trying to shout warnings. But do we listen to them? No, we usually try to shut them down, avoid them, and not listen to them. And this attitude can bring us to the point of no return. So, we need to do something. As I mentioned before, individuals, start to become able to control egocentrism between the ages of 4 and 6. However, when does this age comes to communities, countries, and the whole humanity, unfortunately, I do not know. But what I do know is this. Every community, every society, every country, and the whole humanity is composed out of individuals like you and me. And this is the level where we should start working on this problem. All the accounts of adult egocentrism fall on the continuum between it being a cognitive heuristics on one side and it being a defense mechanism against anxiety on the other. Both these poles can be influenced by self-control, and they cornerstone of self-control is self-awareness. So let me give you a slight theoretical overview how it all works, so you would understand that it's really, really simple. To begin with self-awareness, you start to understand your own mind better, you start to understand yourself better. This understanding of your own mind helps you to be more accurate in constructing the cognitions, the emotions, the goals, the attitudes, everything. You can construct more accurate the mind of another person. And this is the first step. You try to understand the other person. Second step is self-control, and all we need to do there is give another person the equal chance of being right. We claim that we live in a democracy where everybody is equal, but why do we assume that we have the prerogative towards the truth and we have the highest chance of us being right? By virtue of our minds, we humans, we are all fallible. But this also means that every one of us has an equal chance of being right. Thank you.